The first place that broke me after the war wasn't a battlefield. It wasn't a cemetery either. It wasn't a hospital room, or a reunion, or the first night back in my own bed. It was a supermarket. Bright lights, clean floors, soft music overhead, bread stacked so high a man would need a ladder to reach the top shelf. I stood there with one hand on a shopping cart and thought something that made no sense in that moment, but it was the truest thing in my head. I do not belong in a world with this much food. It happened in a quiet little town outside Columbus. Nothing special about the place. Big parking lot. Automatic doors that side open. A row of carts nested together in the front like they were sleeping. The kind of store families drift through on a Saturday without thinking twice. I was alone that day. My wife had given me a short list. Milk, eggs, bread, peanut butter, a few things for dinner, normal stuff. The kind of list a man ought to be able to handle without any trouble. I remember taking the cart because I thought it would make me look normal. I remember the wheels shaking a little over the tile. I remember a little boy in front of me asking his mother for cereal with a cartoon tiger on the box. I remember somebody laughing 2 aisles over. I remember the smell in the produce section, water mist on green vegetables, oranges stacked in perfect rows, apples polished like they had somewhere important to be. Everything in that place looked safe. That was the first thing that felt strange. In war, nothing is just sitting there for you. Nothing waits politely. Nothing shines under soft light. Food comes late, or not at all. Water tastes like metal, dirt, or whatever container it rode in. You don't browse. You don't compare brands. You don't stand there wondering which kind has fewer calories. But in that store, people did exactly that. They stood in front of shelves and took their time. They read labels. They changed their minds. They put things in their carts, then put them back. Nobody looked worried that tomorrow there might be none left. Nobody looked over their shoulder. Nobody counted in their head. Then I turned into the bread aisle. That was it. I still see it clear as day. Long shelves on both sides. White bread, wheat bread, rye bread, sourdough, rolls, buns, English muffins, bagels, things with seeds on top, things with oats baked into the crust, things I had never heard of. Plastic bags puffed up and shining under the lights. Fresh bakery bread off to the side. Warm smell. Yeast and sugar and flour. Clean paper tags. There was more food in that one aisle than I used to see in days. I stopped with that cart halfway turned and just stared. People kept moving around me. A woman reached past my shoulder and grabbed a loaf without even really looking. A teenage boy tossed hamburger buns into his family's cart and kept walking. An old man in suspenders was squeezing loaves with both hands like his biggest problem in life was softness, and I couldn't move. I wasn't hungry, not in the ordinary sense. My stomach wasn't empty. I'd eaten breakfast that morning at my own kitchen table. Eggs, coffee, toast, probably. But something in me went tight anyway. My throat felt closed. My hands went cold. I had this feeling that I had wandered into a place I hadn't earned. That sounds foolish now. I know how it sounds. It was a grocery store, not a church. Nobody there cared who I was. Nobody had asked me to prove anything. But I stood in front of that bread like I'd crossed some invisible line. Because once you've lived where enough is never promised, abundance doesn't always feel comforting. Sometimes it feels like accusation. Back there, food was never just food. It was time. It was luck. It was whether trucks made it through. It was whether the weather turned. It was whether somebody higher up had done their job. It was whether your unit had to move before you got a chance to eat. It was whether the hot meals stayed hot long enough to matter. It was whether the water stayed clean long enough to trust. I can still remember the little things better than the big ones. Not the speeches, not the flags, not even most of the dates. I remember a cracker split 4 ways. I remember a can opened with a knife because we couldn't find the proper tool. I remember men licking rain off their upper lips. I remember how quiet a group gets when food finally arrives. No chatter, no joking, just hands moving fast and heads bent down like prayer. I remember one night when all I had left was half a ration bar in my pocket. It had melted once and hardened again, so it was bent in the wrapper. Tasted like old peanuts and chalk. I broke off little pieces with my front teeth and made myself go slow. Not because it helped. It didn't. But because finishing it too fast felt worse. That's the kind of thing people don't really talk about. Hunger doesn't always arrive like drama. Sometimes it just sits with you. A dull, steady companion. It makes you think stupid thoughts. Makes you count things. Makes you notice crumbs. Makes you stare at another man's hand and see what he has left. There were days when the biggest plan we had was to make it to morning and maybe get something in our stomachs. Not a good meal. Not even a decent one. Just something. That changes a man more than he likes to admit. I knew fellows who talked all day about food from home. Biscuits and gravy, cornbread, fried chicken, their mother's pot roast, chili dogs at a ball game, pancakes at some truck stop back in Texas or Oklahoma or Indiana. They weren't being sentimental. They were building a place in their heads where they could go for 5 minutes. I did it too. Mine was bread sometimes, just plain bread. Fresh bread cut thick with butter. Nothing fancy. Nothing worth noticing in peacetime. But in those days, it might as well have been gold. That's why that aisle hit me the way it did. Not because bread is sacred, not because I'm trying to turn a loaf into a symbol bigger than it is, but because my body remembered something before my mind caught up. It remembered wanting. It remembered not knowing. It remembered that there had been days when a heel of bread would have changed the whole mood of a room. And now here I was, back in America, with 12 feet of shelves groaning under more loaves than one company of men could eat, while people rolled past deciding between honey wheat and split-top white like the world had always been this generous. That's where the shame came in. Not anger, not envy, shame. I didn't feel happy standing there. I felt exposed, wrong somehow, like I was carrying a stain nobody else could see, because part of me was judging those people, and I knew it wasn't fair. Part of me wanted to grab a stranger by the sleeve and say, "Do you understand what you're touching without thinking? Do you understand how many men would have stared at this shelf like it was a miracle?" But another part of me hated myself for thinking that. Those people had every right to buy bread without sorrow. That was the whole point, wasn't it? That ordinary Americans could walk into a clean store on a safe afternoon and fill a cart and argue about brands and go home to make sandwiches for their kids. That was what we said we wanted to protect. So why did I feel sick looking at it? I figured that out a little later, though not all at once. It wasn't the abundance itself. It was the witness of it. A full shelf doesn't just show you what's there. It shows you who is missing to see it. That was the turn of the knife. Because standing there, I wasn't only thinking about hunger. I was thinking about faces, men I had known in dirt and heat and bad sleep, men who laughed with cracked lips, men who saved half a cookie for later, Men who talked about what they were going to eat when they got home. Some of them didn't get home. And now I was standing in front of a bakery display in suburban Ohio with enough bread to feed all of us. And I had this terrible thought that I had crossed into a future that had shut the door behind me. Why me? That question can wait years before it speaks up. People think survivor's guilt comes roaring in right away. Sometimes it does. But sometimes it sneaks up on you in places with shopping carts and polished floors. Sometimes it waits until you're safe enough to notice what safety costs. Why was I the one standing there under white fluorescent lights? Why did I get to come home and be the man reaching for a loaf? Why did I get a life with aisles and choices and cashiers asking if I found everything okay, while other men got a last meal they didn't even know was their last? I don't have answers for that. I never did. I just stood there gripping that cart so hard my knuckles hurt. A store clerk asked if I was all right. Young guy, maybe 19, hairnet on, apron, flour on one sleeve from the bakery. He looked at me the way you look at an older man who seems a little lost. Not rude, just concerned. And I lied the way men like me often lie. I said, "Yeah, just deciding." He nodded and walked on. Just deciding. That stayed with me too, because it was true in a way he couldn't have known. I was deciding whether I could live in that world, whether I could accept it without resenting it, whether I could take hold of a life that had gone back to normal when part of me still didn't trust normal. That's the hard part people don't always understand. Coming home is not one moment. It's a long series of small permissions. You learn to sleep with the window open again. You learn to sit in a restaurant with your back not quite to the wall. You learn that a car door slamming is just a car door. You learn that silence can be real. You learn that your own refrigerator means something. And sometimes you learn that peace can hurt a little before it feels like peace. I eventually reached out and took a loaf off the shelf. Just plain white bread, nothing special. Soft through the bag, warm still, I think. I held it in both hands for a second longer than a person should. It had weight, but not much. Still, it felt heavier than it was. Like I was holding 2 times at once. I put it in the cart and stood there breathing. Around me, life kept going. A baby fussed somewhere near dairy. A scanner beeped at the front, registers. Somebody laughed too loud. Wheels clicked over tile. The overhead speaker called for cleanup in aisle 7. All of it ordinary, all of it American, all of it far from where my mind had gone, and nobody there knew. That may be the loneliest part. Not that people are cruel, most aren't. It's that they can be kind and still have no idea what room you just walked into inside yourself. I finished shopping. Milk, eggs, peanut butter, a pound of ground beef. I even remembered the paper towels. I paid, nodded at the cashier, carried the bags out to the car, and put them in the trunk like any other man running errands on a weekday afternoon. Then I sat behind the wheel with the engine off and cried. Not hard, not loud, just enough to make the steering wheel blur. I didn't cry because the supermarket hurt me. I cried because it showed me the distance between the world I had left and the world I had come back to, and for one long minute, that distance felt too wide to cross. Years have passed since then. I've been in more supermarkets than I can count. I know where they keep everything now. I can walk in, get what I need, and get out. Most days, it's just another store. Most days, bread is bread. But not always. Sometimes I still stop for a second in that aisle. Not because I'm broken there. Not anymore. At least not in the same way. I stopped because I understand now that the store didn't create the wound, it only lit it up. It showed me what war had done to the meaning of enough. For some people, enough is a number. For others, it's a feeling. And once that feeling has been taken from you, it doesn't come back just because the shelves are full. You rebuild it slowly, in kitchens, in quiet mornings, in packed lunches, in leftovers wrapped and put away, in the simple habit of buying bread and trusting it'll still be there next week. That sounds small. It isn't. Even now, when I lift a loaf from the shelf and set it in my cart, there's a little weight to it that other people can't see. Not just flour and air and plastic. Years, faces, empty days, full shelves, a country at peace, a man still learning how to stand inside that peace without apologizing for surviving it. So, if you've ever found yourself undone by something ordinary, maybe it makes more sense than you think. Sometimes the quiet places are where the past speaks the loudest, and sometimes the smallest thing in your hands carries the longest memory. If a place like that has ever taken you back, you're not the only one. You can tell me about it in the comments if you want, and if you'd like, stay a little longer for another quiet story.